Welcome everyone for this afternoon's session of the Levelling Up Housing and Community Select Committee. This afternoon we've got a first evidence session in our inquiry into improving the home buying and selling process. There can hardly be many people who've been through the process of buying or selling a home don't have some ideas about the need for improvement. So we're going to try and explore what those improvements might be, how we can bring them in, and how we can make the process, which often is very challenging and frustrating for people, better in the future. Before I come over to our first panel of witnesses, I'll ask committee members to put on record any interest they may have that may be relevant to this inquiry, apart from having been frustrated by buying or selling a home themselves in the past. I'm a Vice Chair of the Local Government Association. I'll just go around the table and ask committee members in order if they could put on record any interest they may have as well. Yeah. Right.
I'm a Vice Chairman of the Local Government Association. I have a councillor who works for my team in my office, and I've been involved in the New Homes Quality Board in relation to the new home standards which may come up during this investigation inquiry.
Right. Adi?
None.
Anything? Mary? No? Tom?
I'm employed 2 councillors within my office.
And I'm a Vice President of the LGA.
Right. I'll come over to our witness. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Can I just get down the table and ask you in turn to say who you are and the organisation you're here on behalf of?
Thank you. Maria Harris, Chair of the Open Property Data Association, and my background is in mortgages.
Kate Faulkner, Chair of the Home Buying and Selling Group, which is works on behalf of buyers and sellers.
Paula Higgins, CEO and founder of the HomeOwners Alliance, so we support and campaign on behalf of homeowners and those who aspire to own as well.
Right, well thank you all for coming this afternoon on what is an issue I'm sure which has a immediate relevance to so many people in this country, and I have to say, why is it so many people, particularly from the home buying side but also from the selling side as well, who are going through what should be one of the happiest experiences of their life, thinking, we're going to get a brand new home that me and my family can live in, somewhere we really want to purchase, and the end of it, they come out thinking, I'll never do that again. The process has been so truly awful. How can we address those concerns? And are they right to feel that frustrated by the process? Who would like to kick off?
I'll kick off first. Yeah. So I think one of the things to understand is that the home buying selling process often is compared to lots of other things that you buy and sell. I've worked in lots of different markets. It's nothing like everything else. So, for example, it should be an enjoyable process, but because we have a shortage of homes, even if you've got 10 million quid, you're going to have to compromise. So you start a process. If you go and buy a car, toaster, whatever it might be, you're going to be able to buy that. And you'll probably get one in your budget, and you'll probably get one to a spec that you will like, or at least be able to enjoy. And you have no idea if that's going to happen. And if you're a seller and you put your home on the market, you've no idea whether the price is right to some extent. You've no idea how long it's going to take you to actually sell your home. You've no idea then of all of the problems that might come, for example, after an offer is accepted. And on the buying side, you're in a position whereby you're seeing all of these houses. You perhaps haven't even checked whether you as a buyer can afford those properties. And as a result, you might be looking at properties, finding one that you absolutely love, only then to find out later down the line that you can't afford it. Or that there's something wrong with it because you don't know what you don't know in this market. And that is one of the biggest problems, is that people aren't sort of trained to buy and sell, and even if you buy and sell well for the first time, you've got first-time buyers trading up, trading down, you've got people who are investing, people who want to renovate, you've then got shared ownership, you've got leasehold, you've got help to buy. It is an incredibly complicated, and even if you've just got a simple purchase, you're looking at 15 companies being involved in that purchase, as well as a buyer and seller. And if both of those parties don't know what they're doing, if they don't necessarily choose the quality services that are very much available, then it becomes very frustrating. And you don't know that you haven't bought into the right services until way too late down the line. And often at the end of it, you're so exhausted that you also don't even want to complain because you're too tired. And the other thing I would say, though, on behalf of the industry, is don't forget, when people buy and sell, they're having a baby, getting divorced, getting married, somebody's died, they're in debt. They are already in a highly stressed state. And now they're trying to chuck all of their goods in the air and move them to another place, and they're trying to match that maybe with 2 or 3 other purchases. So the reality is it is really difficult. The other side of it, mentioned those 15 companies, we have a lot of tremendous experts, lender through to removal company, who do, quite frankly, it's a miracle really anybody ever moves, and it's only because of the work ethic and the tenacity of the people in it that people do get moved. But the reality is, I think of it as a relay race. What we're not good is that we've got fantastic runners in each sector, but we're not particularly good at passing that baton to each other. And sometimes you have to pass it forward, sometimes you have to pass it backwards. And you only need 1 or 2 poor quality services in the middle, and suddenly, or a buyer and seller that doesn't do the things they need to, and suddenly the whole thing collapses. So it is a complicated thing. We can sort it, very confident of that. We've worked for that for 5.5 years, but it's not easy to do.
Right. Yes,
I think Kate covered it all, my little notes here. I think the other thing I would say is that, other countries can do it very well. It is a very stressful situation. It's your biggest purchase. If you get it wrong, go badly wrong. But I think it's the lack of certainty in the process. And that's where, because you can go right up to the nth hour and pull out with no money off or whatever it is. You can decide to change your mind. You can put the house on the market, change your mind, and you've got no sort of financial penalties. And I think that is one of the problems in this country, is that it's so uncertain. So you can go in without putting any money down, without any commitment to the game, and you could be time wasters as a buyer or as a seller. People don't do this very often. They're not property experts. They don't learn about it in school. We even know that people didn't even understand what leasehold before. And so there's a very sort of a short education. And then I'd also say that the estate agents, that's the first port of call that all these people are finding, like this, whether you're a seller or you're a buyer, and they themselves not sure of the law themselves. So that's one of the, the mortgage, all the other bits of the industry are regulated and professional, but the estate agents are they're the gatekeeper.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I think as well, when Kate's talking about having 15 batons that you're trying to get from one end of the race to the other, it's also not helpful that all those batons are based on paper and forms, and they're all slightly different, and they all need slightly different things, and none of them actually talk to each other, and the entire process is siloed and fragmented, and it's based on pushing bits of paper and documents about and manually checking information and manually checking identity or property details or validating information between different systems that don't speak to each other. So actually the whole thing's really there's nothing that underpins it. It's not data driven, it's very paper, it's very document. We have lots of forms based thinking, and it's just really difficult to get the process from point A to point B for anyone in the industry.
Well, I'm going to come on later, somebody else, is to the issue of digitisation and also potential for reservation agreements, so there will be a cost to pulling out. But what else should be done? I mean, Kate said it's fixable. So if it's so easy to fixable, what's the fixes that we should be introducing?
I didn't say it was easy.
Oh, okay.
I definitely said we can fix
okay.
it. And I think that's one of the things to understand is one of the difficulties that we've had with change is that, for example, on the home buying and selling group, which was brought together to get everybody involved that we needed to, the minimum number of people we've got to be involved, we have 180 people representing different organisations, consumer bodies, the digitisation side. And on the steering group, we have the minimum number we can have to try and say, right, this is a recommendation that we want. So, for example, a good one would be, rather than having multiple ID and fraud checks, wouldn't it be great if we just had one? That would be fantastic for everybody in the industry, especially the buyer and seller. So we would take something like that and we'd make that recommendation, but we'd check it with those 35 people to say, does this work for you? Does this cross your regulations, your codes, anything like that? Or would you support it? Once they support it, we then have to take it out to the 150 people who are mostly representing the different agents, legal companies, who are specifically at the coalface. Because much as we could say, yes, this is a fantastic idea, if the individual legal person, and that's all it is, there's just one person doing the legals on behalf of a buyer and seller, through to a corporate, through to a franchise, through to a network, whatever we recommend of how you fix something, they've all got to say, yes, we can do that. And when you have a tremendous number of those transactions, which are carried out by literally individuals who are also effectively running a company, but they're legal experts, surveying experts, buying and selling a home experts, that's a very difficult task if you want to change things. So one of the things that we have done is we think we know how to do that, and we think we know how to work with everybody to get change and to trial and test things, which is very difficult to do. The other thing that we've looked at is we have put forward, which I know you have, there are things we can do now, things we can do ourselves. One of the things we need some help with from government is the .gov guides are brilliant, and credit to the civil servants that produce the How to Buy, How to Sell, How to Lease guides. We want to add a Building Safety Act guide in there as well. That would be a big help to everybody. And then we can start educating, as Paula mentioned, the consumers in the industry so that they understand everything from end to end, and indeed get the media on side, which is really important. So for us, we've got the things we can do now, which are things like communication better, working together better, and then the other side of it is very much how we can really, really revolutionise the process, which is doing things like mandating upfront information, so that when an offer is made, then that offer is made based on all the information they know, and there's no second guessing, which happens afterwards, which typically collapses 25 to 30%.
Yes, Paul. And you mentioned also...
agree with all that, but I think there's also something here that, we've got legislation in place, and it's about enforcement of existing legislation. We've got to be really, really careful that we're at, upfront information, really good idea, but we're getting examples of day in, day out of now estate agents, making, if someone wants to accept an offer and wants to buy a place, they're being charged £445, non-refundable reservation deposits. So unfortunately, when you've got good ideas that are being tested, but if it goes into the market, if we're not having any sort of regulation around that, this is where consumers are shafted. And one thing that it's been all over the papers of the week, conditional selling. You get any mortgage broker here, you'll be told that buyers are refused from going to see the viewing properties, or refused from getting a mortgage because they've got to go to their in-house mortgage broker, and that is happening all the time now, and it's been happening for years. So I'd also say that there needs to be enforcement of existing legislation, as well as, because the vast majority of estate agents, and there's lots of professional people out there, but there are some rogue traders, and we need to...
Should they be regulated?
They should be right, yeah, and but there should also be enforcement, because we know that what they're doing is illegal now, but there's no enforcement about it. It's really hard as a buyer, and because you don't end up going to complain, because you just get the whole, you don't get the property in the end, so you just move on. You don't want to complain about the estate agent because they're the gateway to the local properties in your area. It's incredibly hard if you can even try to complain to trading standards via citizens' advice. It's a very convoluted system. There's no place, particularly for buyers. I mean, we're every week getting people emailing us saying, I've been charged £450 to buy a property up front. There's a £13,500 reservation fee that's non-refundable. The modern methods of auction. So we see all these sharp practices that, years ago it was sale by tender, where they're putting, 2% commission on buyers. And it's these types of sharp practices that need to be stamped out. If we can get that would make a huge difference to people buying and selling. And that's where I think the regulation and having something that estate agents, or better enforcement of existing regulation with fines, maybe the FCA needs to look at it, but that's what's happening now. So even though we've got the legislation here, it's about enforcement of that legislation.
And there's so when Kate's talking about collaboration, and you're trying to get that level of engagement and collaboration over quite a broad set of industry participants, but we've also then got to add in that lots of property data is actually custodianed by government departments. It's public data, or it's local authority data, or it's private sources of data, and actually there's no collaboration across that full end-to-end of everyone who touches the property transaction or the property data in some way, and there's no legislation that sits across all of that. So there is no one view of how the customer experience should work, or what the customer journey should be, or any standardisation of things like policy, legislation, protocols, guidance.
You've got all these different bits of a process. Yeah. How would you get an overarching regulation, coordination?
Well, we did it with open banking, but again, it was government driven, it was CMA driven, and it was kind of forced that industry and fintech and other people had to come in and do that work for them and create a framework and standards and guidance on how to do that. But open banking's then gone on to, and the UK led on that. It was such a phenomenal thing to do, and now it's gone around the world for open finance and other open ecosystems. So it is possible to do it, but I'm not saying, it's a big piece of work to do.
And I would say we have actually already achieved it. So the COVID guidance that went out, again with amazing help from the civil servants that we had, that COVID guidance was absolutely from start to finish looked at through the buyers and sellers' eyes, and it was because of, I think there was about 50 of us on the group talking that through to work out how do we do something that doesn't mean you get the lenders saying this is how to work during COVID, the brokers saying this is how you should work, the surveyors saying. We had an absolute consistent working together, and that's because we've got the core people that we need to work together as well as the people at the coalface. So that's how you start. So it is possible. We also did it on the stamp duty. Normally there's a cliff edge as soon as you end a stamp duty holiday. We're grateful to Treasury who kindly extended it for us because we knew there was a problem. But in that case we had even extra help, because not only was the industry saying help, we can't move this many people in this amount of time for the first stamp duty ending at the end of March, and we actually had help from the media, and letters went out to everybody so that those buyers knew that that there was a possibility we couldn't complete on that day. Natalie mentioned the New Homes Ombudsman. Well, we produced the snagging survey that was agreed by everybody for that. So we can do it. We just had to get everybody in a room, and I think we've cracked that part of it.
Okay. Now you've got a supplementary.
Thank you. And just for some clarity at the beginning, because we'll be talking about conveyancers quite a lot. At one time, a solicitor would be typically the conveyancer, and now, of course, it's expanded out, and there's licensed conveyancers, etc. When you're speaking about how do you complain about a conveyancer, if it was a solicitor, presumably you'd be able to go to the Legal Ombudsman or the Solicitors Regulation Authority. I assume, it may be the wrong assumption. Is there no place to complain about a licensed conveyancer, or is it the same?
There is. You can complain. It's the Council of Licensed Conveyancers, because conveyancers are also regulated. And I must say that in terms of complaints, we get, I always say the biggest source of complaints, I get over 4 million home buyers and sellers every year to my website. It's usually to deal with new build, leasehold, estate agents. I think the solicitors themselves and the conveyancers, in terms of, but there is definitely routes through. It is more difficult, I think, to complain about an estate agent, particularly if you're a buyer, or that you feel that you were misled on information. You didn't have that upfront information, even though the legislation is there.
Thanks for the clarity. Thank you.
Can I just say, one of the things that I see in property time and time again, and we see it, I work in lettings as well, and you can also see it in property management, one of the things that I think we need to try and start doing is thinking about how we actually stop those complaints in the first place. And for many of us, we don't feel there is enough protection at the start. You have to stop bad agents, bad properties, and indeed in the letting sector, bad landlords from ever being able to operate in the market. We have a tight stock situation, and whatever rights you give somebody, particularly out of the stress of moving, they're not going to complain as they should do, because A, it's kind of too late, but they're also too exhausted. So we have to start putting fences at the top of the cliff rather than doing what I feel happens a lot of the time. We put more ambulances at the bottom, and that's not helping us, and hence why the regulation of agents is so essential to fix lettings, home buying and selling, but also the block management side of things as well.
One follow-up. Paula, you mentioned other countries do it better.
Sorry?
Other countries do it better. I think you mentioned
Yes,
that.
I mean, if you look at the transaction times in other countries, and I think a lot of it in I looked at Netherlands and Canada, for instance. In Canada, you put your house on the market to sell. If you've agreed an offer, you can't pull out. I mean, I've chosen to put my house on the market. Why is it that you can decide and I think there's some stats in the evidence I gave, why at the last minute you could decide, I'm not going to move now. I've wasted everyone's time. You've got no money. You haven't lost anything in the game. You've got no skin in the game. So So, and then of course we know about Scotland. I think the only thing is I would very much, I know a lot of people look at like Norway and places like that, and I think it is important to look at countries that are more similar to the UK in terms of the size and the complexity and the fact that actually the digitization and the land records are so old, as opposed to like a small country that's got an awful lot of money and and properly qualified. Their estate agents are university educated. But
we'll move on to digitization and reservation fees in a minute. But let's move on to information next. Next questions to be asked, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, so if you could be as succinct as possible in your answers. Could you briefly explain what material information is in the home buying and selling process and how important you think it is?
Okay, so there's kind of two that we're talking about at the moment. One is specifically material information, and that typically refers to the latest sort of requirements, if you like, from national trading standards. So there's about 15 things which are split into parts A, parts B and parts C that national trading standards have now said, agents, when you advertise a property, you must have this information available for buyers. So that's the material information. You then have a wider remit of upfront information. On the home buying selling group, people worked very hard to identify, I think we're up to 300 things that a buyer may need to know, or not just the buyer, but the lender, right through to that removal company, may need to know before they actually say, yes, this is an offer. So it's not 300 things for every property, it's maybe 100 things, but 50 of those might be the same, but 50, 60 of those might be completely different. Think leasehold, sharehold differences, shared ownership, the differences that you might have. So you've got two parts of data, the material information, which is kind of like the latest must-have data, and then you have the upfront information, and all of those need to be able to flow up and down that chain from lender through to removal company, and indeed land registry, government, etc.
And I would add that it's not actually happening. I mean, the actual material information, parts A, B, and C, was only published late last year. They're now sort of talking to estate agents, talking to Rightmove, but the reality of actually that information, even the basic stuff, is actually, are we actually going to get there? And is it going to be that when we get onto Rightmove, we can see all that information up front like an auction pack? I don't know.
How important do you think it is?
The material information was meant to make the process for the buyer more informed, so that before you go to view a property, there's more information available and that you can see some of the things that might be really important to your buying decision. So in terms of giving estate agent clarity around what needs to be on the listing, it's good, it's really helpful, because it's absolutely abundantly clear this is the information you must include on the listing, and that's good for the estate agent and the buyer. What it doesn't do is impact anything else to do with your home buying transaction, because that's not the information that the mortgage lender needs or that the conveyancer needs to do the legal process and the things that actually get you the keys to the house. So it's really important for the listing, but not so much for the rest of the home buying process.
And just to add, one critical thing is, if we can crack these 15 pieces of material information, if we can learn how to share and have that information trusted up and down the chain, delivering 300 pieces of information when required is a lot easier. And that's the process that we're going through. So it's critical to being able to, what I would call, revolutionise the process. It's a start.
Thank you. And do you think the National Trading Standards, the state and letting agency teams' guidance on material information is adequate to support the needs of consumers?
I think it is, actually, and it's a lot of the information is what you'd be asked the sellers would have to do as a part of this TA6 form. I think the only sort of gap at the moment, and it's more about actually making it happen, is I don't think there's enough around new build estate charges, which is quite a live issue at the moment, and actually the service charges around that, because people are buying new build are not aware, and the management structures of the new build.
Yeah, and I would say the same for things like shared ownership or social housing, where there are clauses or restrictions around even what lender you can use. There are things in there that are really important to somebody who's looking at that property that aren't included.
And I think just on the sort of ground, talking to agents and others, you've got the parts A, B and C. The parts A and B are pretty okay to deliver. The parts C are a little bit trickier, and the reason for that is because we've got to understand better what the line is between what an agent can deliver because some of those questions would be classed as the expertise of a legal person, and some of the answers to those questions would potentially need a surveyor, and we need that clarity. But again, this helps us learn the process of how we get that baton crossed between us. And then just to reiterate, bearing in mind that's a real building block that we need to revolutionise things for the future, to try and get agents to do that aren't regulated, and even more scarily, we say don't need to be qualified. That's where it's difficult for us to completely get it over the line, and we need some help.
Because it's, they're selling property, so, they're not going to really want to show warts and all, really. So the fundamentals, that's why you want to have that sort of, you have to have that upfront information for buyers so they can really make a choice of whether they want to view the property.
And a cultural shift in the industry.
Of course. And do you think that guidance on material information from the NTSELAT
it takes a while to learn all these.
do you think that should be formally codified, for example, through legislation?
It's got to be mandated. And one of the reasons to explain why do we ask for things to be mandated. So in that relay race, we've not only got one relay race going round, but if you're in a chain, we've got 4 relay races going round. If one out of the 3 homes that are in the chain are only doing the work, it makes no difference. So without mandating certain of the building blocks that we need to change the process and make it better for buyers and sellers, then we are not able to change it for everybody, because 2 out of 3 don't do it. Well, the third one doesn't benefit, if you see what I mean. So that's one of the essential parts of the difference, I guess, with the.
And I'd say it has been around through the CPRs, but the thing is that it's not being enforced. So that a lot of the stuff that estate agents should be doing, but unfortunately, if you do find that you bought a property that isn't fit for purpose, you felt lied to, there's no redress and enforcement behind that. So that's where, at least if we had a code that would sort of capture all estate agents and encourage them to know, so they understand what they need to do, really.
Yeah. It's really important to make that distinction, though, about material information and the full property pack, because codifying the material information and having really solid listings is good and it is helpful. But let's say that's not the biggest impact on the rest of the home buying process, because if you're not flushing out the things that a mortgage lender needs to do, you start a mortgage application process and then find that lender can't even lend on that property. Yeah. So if you were going to take it to the thing that's most useful for consumers, you would actually mandate a full digital property pack on every transaction, because then the conveyancer and the valuer and everyone has what they need.
And do you think that the digitisation of material information would prevent the duplication of work by different parties, such as conveyancers?
Yes.
Great.
My shortest answer ever.
And how can the industry ensure that buyers interpret material information provided by sellers accurately, given that buyers usually don't have legal advice at that stage?
So part of the recommendation actually of material information and a digital property pack is that the seller should have their conveyancer instructed and the title and all of that information checked before the property's even listed. And that actually should be the first thing. A buyer should know that somebody's already started looking at the title, at the deeds, has ordered the searches, has found out all of the things that are going to impact. So when they instruct their conveyancer, they're not starting from the beginning of the race. And that's one of the things that I think need to be included in the mandation, is that a seller should have to instruct their conveyancer and have that legal work done pre-listing, pre-marketing.
And one of the things we've also recommended, I don't know if you're familiar with the letting side, but tenants now, it's mandated that the .gov how to rent guide has to be issued to the tenant. We'd like to see the same for the how to buy, how to sell, how to lease guide, with the additional building safety. What that allows us to do is it sets out how buyers and sellers sell. It comes from an official source, so it's trusted. And what we're then looking to do is to create individual consumer guides. So, for example, we would have a guide for buyers to say, and here's what you need to be looking out for, and you need to make sure the property you go and see has all of this information prior to you going to see it. Just like we would be asking them to make sure they're not visiting properties that they haven't been financially qualified for. So what we've created is, by having those .gov guides, we can cascade the information to consumers every single thing that's signed off is signed off from a lender's threat removal company's perspective, so everybody agrees with it, and we're not giving the huge amount of inconsistent information that's being given out at the moment.
And I would say I wouldn't expect consumers to read the full how to buy, how to sell guides, but I think what's the important thing about it is the fact that then others can interpret it, or and that's the sort of the Bible. So the estate agents can do that. So, of course you want people to read what they should, but they don't, the reality is. And that's why they're looking to their estate agents, to their conveyancers, and, to make sure they ask the right questions.
Thank you. Final question from me. What lessons on providing material information up front do you think can be learnt from the previous attempt to introduce home information packs and also Scotland's use of home reports?
So on home information packs, this goes back to you need those 35 organisations to agree and to flesh this out amongst them how it would work. And it was a government initiative, always appreciated, but that I was around at the time writing the property books for which, and the really sad thing was actually there was a lot of things that were right in the idea of doing it were correct. We didn't have the level of technology that we have today, so we're much more capable of delivering. One of the problems was because it was an upfront charge, there was not necessarily the quality of information that needed to be provided, so there were issues there. That's again something that Mairead and everybody's been working on to make sure that doesn't happen again. And the really big thing to understand is that all the material information and the upfront information that's being recommended to be upfront and the way we're doing it, that's all been worked on for the last 5.5 years to try and get it as right as we can be. So we've done it the other way round. You kind of got to do things bottom up, not top down. So that's the first, I think, biggest lesson that we've learnt. And also, with those property logbooks that we're talking about, they take into account the lettings industry, and they take into account the block management as well. So, for example, you can't just look at something in isolation. So you've got the rent reform going through at the moment. That's recommending a property portal. That needs to be done in line with the property logbooks that are being created for home buying and selling. So you've got to have that joined up approach. So those are the kind of things that we've learnt. In Scotland with the home reports, Scotland's very different. So they're used to paying up front already. They typically pay for marketing packs, whereas here it's typically free in England and Wales. And because the home report was mandated, that meant that everybody did it. So you're talking about £1,000 potentially up front to put your property on the market. So, but people are more used to that. People are very resistant here unless it's mandated to do anything. Buyers and sellers from putting money, because they're just not used to it. Everything's for free or deferred or whatever. So we've got to change that. And then on the home report, one of the benefits of that, which almost means that it's cost neutral for the buyers and sellers, is that when the pack goes out with the valuation on it, my understanding is that valuation is one that will be accepted by the lender. So when we spoke earlier, I've no idea what I'm going to get for my property. I've no idea whether I'm going to get a property. With Scotland, you've got the home report. You've got the certainty that Paula mentioned that this is probably the right price to pay for that property. Because it's been pre-approved, if you like, as well as having the condition report, which lists all of the things that may need to be corrected on that property, so that you know it's £30,000 or a couple of £1,000. And so we've learnt from that. And again, the way we're going to be looking at it, we have a group that's working on this now, is we need to say, well, does that suit the lettings side of things? So 1 in 3 properties in lettings has a category 1 hazard. One of the reasons I believe that happens is because when people are buying and selling, they don't have to check the property's safe from a lettings perspective. And we need to solve both of those problems. So it might well be, we say, electrical and gas safety checks are the most important thing, particularly with the age of our properties. So it's about, again, looking at things holistically. So I hope that helps.
Really helpful, thank you.
Okay, right, just moving on to maybe some challenges of the upfront information. No.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As we've said, much of the information, the material information, is currently found by conveyancers on behalf of buyer. If sellers become required to provide information at point of listing, the burden of accessing information shifts from the sellers to sellers from buyers, and there'll be an impact to that. What, in your view, would be the impact of financially or in terms of the legal burden on the seller, if and when this burden moves?
I think it's the main impact will be a big impact. It will shorten the transaction times because you've got more information. So in terms of the time wasters and things like that. So, and actually, if you think about it, that actually the person who's most able to pay for that legal work should be the seller if they're selling their home in the first place. So, the buyers, you think about all the different costs they've got there. So to have that information, you're getting your house ready for sale. And the other thing I just want to say on the HIPS things, I mean, one of the reasons I worked in the housing department at the time. I wasn't working on that. But just because it failed, it wasn't because it failed, it wasn't a good idea. It failed because there's lots of political wranglings there. And the other thing I'd say is actually there's a lot of vested interest. So, surveyors, valuation, people who do get more money each time a transaction fails. So just be wary of, certain types of industry that quite like the status quo at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think as well, most people who are selling a house are also buying a house at the same time. So most people who are sellers are buyers, and all we're doing is changing the point in time that they pay and moving it to the beginning, but giving them the certainty that their transaction is much more likely to go ahead. They will have more transparency but more control over the time frame and how long that really takes, which enables their buying process to also be smoother. And at the moment, those things are just so out of sync with each other. So I think asking the seller to do it up front is actually the right place to have it.
And I also think, though, it's, again, in property, not one thing it's like just one thing doesn't work. You've got to do a multitude of that. So you're absolutely right. Well, the burden now falls upon the seller to provide this information. Well, if we digitise property data correctly, we've already got companies that are, agents and legal companies working together as well as PropTech to come up with ways to mean that you can press a button and that information is pretty much pulled into an inbox. Now, there's various ways of doing it. That's one way of doing it. We've got fantastic case studies of where legal companies and agents have actually completely re-engineered the putting a property on the market process, and as a result of that, the legal company is involved much earlier on. So yes, some information is coming from the seller, but it doesn't mean that if we get it right, the burden doesn't fall on that seller. We still need the expertise of the legal company and the surveying company. What we need to work out is, well, how much can an agent and a seller do, and then how much do we have to get the legal and the surveying companies involved, and when, and have we got the right services for them. But people are already delivering this and doing it very successfully, and it is reducing the time and the certainty.
And I would add that we know that lots of people don't do surveys when you're buying, and it's absolutely tragic. You've got buyers who will be out of pocket thousands of pounds just because maybe a seller pulled out at the last minute or couldn't find a house to move to. We offer something called home buyers protection insurance, and actually that's an incredibly popular thing to stop. So it's, imagine you're paying out, equivalent £1,500 for a property that you've got nothing to show for, and those types of costs coming out, and someone who's desperately trying to buy a property, that's just unfair.
If there are, not all sellers, pull out, and they don't all have bad motives, and there are people who are just kind of speculative. They'll put their property on the market because they're getting ready for a move. They're not really very bothered about it, but then actually they do go ahead and sell.
But if they accept an offer, so that's fine. Even if they want to do that, but then, you feel sorry for the estate agents who are doing all this work with no... But, if they are thinking of doing it, but if once they accept that offer, they've chosen to accept the offer, I don't think there should be any very few reasons why they should be allowed to pull out without any financial penalty.
Just exploring this a little bit more. So, for instance, if a person who was a bit speculative, the children have left home, I might just sell my house, let's put it up on the market and see, if there's any interest. And they do get somebody who wants to buy, etc. And from their point of view, they're going to be taking on a burden of in terms of the cost, etc. But we don't want them to think, I'm not going to make that speculative. I'm not going to put it on the market because there will be a cost to me doing this. And it may actually tighten the market in a little bit. Is that a consideration?
So what you could do is you could have, if the seller puts it on, that, that's why the original idea of the reservation deposit. So, both sides puts in £1,000, or one of our suggestions. So the seller, if they pull out, then they lose £1,000. So there could be something there, but you have to think about the wider costs of the seller deciding to pull. And a lot of it's the stress of gazumping, gazundering. I mean, it doesn't happen as much as we like to think it is, but it's only in England that we talk about it. This doesn't happen. Once you've agreed the price, you've agreed the price.
Who make these changes? Do we have to consider giving some support to sellers?
In what way?
You're going to ask that for aspiring first-time buyers?
Yeah. But interestingly,
where
it's quite interesting is to talk to people that some of the people that we speak to, they actually work in the English and the Scottish market, and in terms of the speculative sales, you've got to think of the actual cost potentially of that speculative sale to everybody. This is somebody's going out buying, and we're putting a property in front, and they're not quite sure that if you don't make the right offer, they're going to make that. So I would say that's fine to look after the seller, but actually the buyer and the agent that's potentially doing this free of charge, is that the right way to look at it? So having spoken to people that, again, look after sort of both sides, where you pay £1,000, you put the property in the market in Scotland, I do think that once we get the culture change, and again, this is where we can't do it without the media, we need their help, and we've had that before and it works, to say, look, you've got to put some skin in the game, and you've got to be fair to everybody. And maybe what it needs is not that they put it on speculatively, but we have to work with them more closely to say, well, if you do want to sell it, let's try and really understand what is it. And if you want £300,000, and I'm afraid no chance of getting more than 250, let's wait till the market moves or something like that. So we have to, I think about a better way of dealing with the speculative seller than thinking, yes, they should just kind of go ahead, because the collapse after that is unfair on everyone.
And I don't believe, from the Scottish example, that after they did bring in that you had to have your property pack up front, that there was any restriction in the market, or the transactions fell at all. And certainly in other countries like Norway, where it is digital up front, I don't think they've seen any of that drop off either.
And actually there might be a slightly different issue, where you're kind of Midlands downwards, you will probably have £500 or £1,000 to put your property on the market. However, where, and this does exist, you have a 50, 60, 70,000 pound property, you may not have the funds available, in which case what I've asked is said, well, in those cases, is it possible to have deferred payment? Those things can and have happened in the past. However, this is where it gets complicated, why you have to work with people that are doing this at the coalface all the time, is that some people then, they don't want to take the property off the market, even though they know it's not going to sell, because they don't want to have that cost attached. But I can't believe, with the expertise we don't have in the industry, we can't find a way around that. Thank you.
Thanks. Moving on to the issue of reservation agreements. Tom.
Thank you. What would you say the main benefits and costs are to using reservation agreements?
So for the reservation agreements, from the companies that I've spoken to, one of them, they don't insist that a seller takes them, but where they've got good sales managers doing it well, they've got around 80% of their sellers who are choosing to do reservation agreements, and the buyer comes with them. They pay £300 each to enter into the reservation agreement, and then if the sale falls through because they are pulling out, not if somebody's died or something like that happens, then typically the seller or the buyer would get a cost of £2,000. Now, in terms of benefits, the average fall-through rate is about 25 to 30%. In this particular case, it's 6%.
So 6% fall through.
Yeah, and it speeds up the transaction as well. So that is obviously one case, and that's my best one. But there are about, I think there's 1,000 companies that are doing this, agents that are doing it currently. And of course, it's very normal in the new build market, where it works perfectly well.
And it's how we do it in Spain. Everybody in Spain, you pay a reservation agreement as soon as your offer has been accepted. That's standard practice.
It is, yeah, and I'd say exactly that, but you've got to make sure that if you have this reservation agreement, that there's some regulation, because we're seeing now really sharp practices of people, of more unscrupulous estate agents who are demanding reservation deposits and then keeping them, and they are quite substantial. And the other areas in online auctions, there's non-refundable reservation deposits from buyers of £6,500. So it's quite a. This is where what could be a good idea, if we don't actually have good regulation around it, it can be abused.
How widespread in the UK are they? What's the percentage of transactions involve reservation agreements?
Tiny, I'd say.
Yeah, it's really low here, but that's partly because back to the what information's available up front. Why would you put a reservation agreement on something today when you don't have the full information about the property? You don't know what's in the searches. Nobody's checked the title or the deed. You don't even know if that property can get a mortgage. You don't know if it's insurable. Why would you put a reservation on something like that today when you've got no idea what you're actually buying? So unless we fix having the right information up front, the reservation agreement's not something you would ever use.
And that's backed up by the agents that I talk to. They're doing both. They've got the upfront information and they're doing the reservation agreements, and the two have to go hand in hand.
So, because I know in Scotland, at the point a seller accepts an offer, that offer becomes binding.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering the difference between how the model in Scotland, how that works, and reservation agreements. What are the main differences between those two?
So working that backwards, so from a seller's perspective, you've got the information up front and you've got the home report up front already, so you've actually got to the upfront. They just do it in a different way. So you can do I guess you could do a provision of the information. So you've got the upfront information and you've got the survey. In which case then you can enter into the agreement. Would that be right? Whereas here we're doing the reservation agreements because you haven't got those two other things.
So with the reservation agreement, so say for £300 case, you just lose the £300 if you pull out. Whereas in Scotland, what's the penalty if you pull out?
You can't. Well, I don't think you can. If you've agreed to an offer and you're selling your property,
You can't
pull
Yes,
out. And a
exchange.
buyer also, if they put in an offer and they've decided to pull out, they'll lose thousands. So it's a proper contract. But at the moment now here, people do not have the right information to sign that contract, and there's a danger that if you put so much in the reservation agreement but not with the upfront information, it becomes almost another stage before exchange to a completion. So that's why it's got to be done properly.
So in Scotland, you do get that information up front then?
Exactly.
Everything, literally everything's up front. Your mortgage offer's up front, all of the legal checks have been done, and the property's been surveyed.
So it's not really a fair comparison between...
No, and the estate agents there generally work very much alongside the solicitors and legal teams. So because if an estate agent, if once you put a property on the market, if a buyer wants to look at it, I think they have to give the home reports within 9 days of a property going onto the market. So
if you had a few options here, either reservation agreements being really widespread, but with that regulation you were talking about, and more information being provided up front, but the penalty if you pull out sort of just losing 300 or 400 quid, or the Scottish approach where it's very binding and the consequences of pulling out are a lot more significant. What do you think would be better? Do you think there's a danger that the Scottish approach perhaps goes a bit too far?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it could be then you'd be really scared because, of course, circumstances change. So I guess with a little bit of, skin in the game, that you're actually covering, say, the other person's costs, that having some sort of reservation agreement to give a bit more flexibility to say, okay, well, actually, I am going to pull out and I'm going to lose that amount of money. So, maybe it's a step too far to go binding offer, and it's a very different way, because a lot of estate agents they encourage people to put properties on the market speculatively as well. So they do a lot of door knocking, things like that. So that's it's a very different cultural change if we're going to make it that buyers have binding offers. Sellers have binding offers.
There's a slightly different question here. So, a lot of people obviously have the experience of purchasing a home, and it drags on. I think my last purchase was August. I made an offer, and it was December by the time it got, it had gone through.
That's and not too bad, actually.
That's great.
But it felt like a long time.
Yeah.
It felt like a lifetime. And of course, it is a stressful period because you're always wondering, is someone going to pull out at the last minute, etc., etc. And a lot of people say with solicitors who are involved, are to blame for taking too long, for just taking too long to do things. And then they often may say, we've got so much different things on, we're working as fast as we can. So I guess, are there enough law firms working in this area? Is there a shortage, which is why it's taking so long? Or does there need to be maybe a bit of a cultural change in terms of expectations, in terms of how quickly these things get done? What's the truth of the matter?
Yeah, so if you looked at the home buying process today and the steps that you go through from 1 to 10 that you went through from August to December, it's backside forward. You literally do everything in the wrong order. All of the things that you needed to know to get the process to completion all happen at the end instead of at the beginning. And that's part of the reason it's so bad. And because everything is paper driven and forms, and you multiplying that effort of you having to fill in the same information multiple times in multiple different formats, the person at the other end is then having to check what you've entered, and they're keying it into systems, or then they're sharing it via email or via systems to other places. It's not that we don't have enough people, it's that the amount of time we're spending doing inefficient tasks and things that actually add no value and in the wrong order are just tying the system up in knots. Whereas actually, if you flipped the entire process on its head and your seller had all of their information available in a beautiful digital format at the beginning, and it had been checked by a property specialist, a lawyer, a certificate, whatever, a conveyancer, all of that work had been done before that property was even listed, there is nothing to stop you going straight through that process in a reasonable amount of time, or at least with the certainty and trust of knowing what's happening during the transaction. And right now, everything's just opaque and disjointed, and you're repeatedly doing tasks that add no value.
And I would also add that it's the lack of communication and lots of Chinese whispers because no one's speaking to each other. So we did research, 55% of people who bought in the last 2 years, what they will say is they want more joined up communication. They don't know what's happening up and down the chain. And how to crack that, I'm not so sure. But that's the problem, because you're told not to speak to, you don't speak to the buyer who's trying to buy your property. You're speaking through estate agents, conveyancers, everyone's kind of, rubbishing each other, or you might have somebody who is thinking of pulling out, so they've just gone all quiet, and then it's the conveyancer themselves that are sort of saying, this conveyancer really slow. Well, actually, the seller's gone AWOL. So I think that also there's no transparency of information there, so you really don't know what's happening, especially in chains.
And I think it's Law Tech UK did a report in 2022, and they found that most transactions generate around 130 documents and around 300 email/telephone calls between transaction parties to try and get that transaction from August to December. So the amount of effort that's in there that is just dead time, it's just inefficient time in process.
What countries would you come to mind when it comes to, because you're talking about the system and how it's a wrong way around, is there a country you have in mind where that isn't the case, and they're just in a much better place when it comes to the system?
We talked about Norway earlier. In Norway, all of that work is done up front, but also the data is actually open source and free, which is hugely helpful because land registry digitised. But that was obviously much easier because smaller land registry, they have six main lenders who worked together and collaborated to get that work done, which was helpful. But even in places like the States and Australia, it's really common that all of the property information is done at the beginning and is checked, and that as a buyer you know all of that work's been done before you submit a mortgage offer. I actually live in Spain, and that's how it's done in Spain. All of the property information, all of the title check and everything's done before you accept an offer, and once you accept an offer you are binding, you pay a reservation agreement. So I think it's really common in lots of other countries.
Netherlands as well.
Yeah.
We have heard of a lot of flat sales and exchanges in Spain going very badly wrong, and people losing their money on flats they've done. So if this is a good system, how did that happen?
Well, I didn't say it was all good, but they certainly have more information up front. I don't know about the flats one, but I'll have a look and I'll email you afterwards.
And also, can I just say, on the conveyancing side, and this also goes for agents and surveyors, one of the difficulties, we have a lot of amazing people in this industry, and if you just think over the last few years, all of the things out of their control that have suddenly landed on their desk, the Building Safety Act, I think back to when the stamp duty changes were there. The old days, you could just go, dup, 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 and this is what the stamp duty could be. It's now in excess of 30 pages, the guidance on that. That kind of landed on the legal company's desk. They can't charge any more for it because it's a hugely competitive market, and they're not tax experts. So with the Building Safety Act, that is a huge amount of extra work. That's costing an extra £1,000 on the purchase of a property from a legal perspective because of the amount of extra work. One of the other things that we need to do, we try to do it with the leasehold bill, we're kind of back engineering it on the Building Safety Act, is that whenever we want to change something that's going to impact home buying and selling, we need to run it through a system to say, right, what's the role of the agent in this? How does that change? What's the role of the legal company? What's the role of surveying? And do you think, like Japanese knotweed, all of these changes, they're kind of put on the industry. It's totally out of their control, as are the number of transactions. This is one of the few industries I've worked in.
A final question from me, just because in terms of information being provided up front and information to the buyer, because it was brought to my attention recently an example where an individual was purchasing a flat in London, and they thought that the seller owned 100% of the flat, and then it came out sort of right at the end that actually they only owned a third of it, and then 2/3 of it was owned by the housing association. So that added another 6 weeks apparently, because they had to do the staircasing, which they weren't aware of when they purchased it. As it wasn't a huge deal. It was a bit frustrating, but you would have thought that information would have been provided up front.
Should.
Yeah.
Exactly what you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the next question from me, I think, are going to be fairly easy to answer, probably fairly quick. Digitalisation, we've already talked about that in responses to a number of questions. So, you obviously all think it should happen. Why is it taking such a long time to get it in place?
Okay, so if you look at where all of the property data currently sits, you think about land registry, local authorities, search data, it sits in lots and lots of different places. And the reality is today that none of that data at source is in a digital format. It's not structured to a common standard, it's not available over APIs, it's not machine readable, it's sitting in PDFs, reports, documents, pictures, drawings, contracts, paper, microfiche, everything you can imagine. And the job to digitise that data hasn't really started in anger. And I know that it was one of the recommendations from the last Levelling Up inquiry in 2017, and we had promises from the government in 2018 that public data sets would be released as open data, and that would include land registry, searches, Con 29, planning, building regulations, and we're now in 2024 and none of that data is digital. So when we talk about the challenges that the industry is leaning into, it's very hard to digitalise a process when you're not starting with a digital foundation, and we have to fix that infrastructure. We have no ecosystem for the property industry at all that data sits on, and we have no trust framework for collecting and sharing the data.
Where should it begin, this process, then?
We have recommended several times that we need to start with titles, deeds and Con 29, because those are the three biggest impacts on transactions falling through, mortgages falling through, or things being added, delays to the process, because they're the three biggest impact areas.
That's government, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. And how long should that take to do?
Well, I think the local land charges project have been running 6 years now, and
30%,
we've managed to do 80-something local authorities for one local authority search. So we've got a lot of work to do.
But it's possible.
It's possible. The technology's definitely moved on, but it needs to be done. We're not going to fix this unless we solve our infrastructure problem.
Is there any estimate done how long it should take now, if there was a will to do it?
I would like it to be done within 3 years. I think it's achievable to have it done within 3 years, based on the technology and the digitisation that's already been done for finance, for other industries, for smart data initiatives.
And is there any other organisation should now be up front pushing the Law Society? Should they be doing more?
So when we were talking before about paper-driven processes and protocols that don't support digital services, that's probably a really good example of forms-based thinking, and maybe guidance that still references sending things by fax or doing completions by post, or things that are based on forms where the forms are actually licensed, and there is intellectual property on the way those forms are structured and the questions that they are asked that don't enable them to be completed in a digital format and with data. But it's not just, I mean, Law Society is a good example of forms-based thinking, but it's not the only one. We have lenders' handbooks with UK Finance that don't support digital identity, digital signatures. Even Land Registry's own guidance doesn't support electronic signatures. So there's, all of those things need to be aligned, and they need to be
century,
common.
We've got to move them to this century, basically.
Absolutely, yes.
Right. Any other comments to make of that?
I think from my side is that it does feel, when you first hear about it, a bit of an impossible task. But the reality is that we know what we have to do now. We've got everybody working together in a way that's never been achieved in the last 30 years. And with government help, we can deliver the best buying and selling service. And I know I'm being very brave saying that, but I really believe it. We've got an industry that can do it, but we need some help from government.
And we do need to move collectively. Like,
yes.
We all have to take the same step at the same time. Otherwise, the customer's not any better off.
Correct.
I would just say that, because I did look at this up, but we've got 30%, 96 of the 331 registers, local land charges has been digitised. So, you know, they are putting more resource into it, but now that they've kind of cracked it, why can't we accelerate that program? And I'd say, as a consumer, you know, we go on and look at our taxes, we can, you know, do that. Why can't we just log on to Land Registry and look up my property data and see it all there, and then if I see if there's problems, whatever, and take ownership of it as this is my home.
I was going to ask, are there any other sectors which have done this process, digitalisation, and done it well that can be learned from?
Well, it's interesting because before I started working in financial services, I used to work in the travel industry. And if you think about, the last time you flew, it doesn't matter where you fly from or which airline you fly on. Every airport uses the same 3-letter code. You have the same scanning system for your baggage. Ticketing information's in exactly the same standard and structure. Everybody has to connect to air traffic control and use the same identifiers. And it's just normal. But that standardisation underpins the internet. We have it for 3-pin plugs. We literally have standards for everything, and we don't have that for the property industry. It's actually quite staggering that for something that's such an important purchase and so complicated, that we don't have that infrastructure when we have it in so many other things that we just take it for granted.
And the fair data principles, the UK National Data Strategy lays down, is that easy to adopt?
Yes, so that's actually what we've written our data standards on. So in 2020, the government published the UK National Data Strategy, which said that all data should be adopted fair data principles, which just means that data should be digitised in a way that makes it findable, easy to access, interoperable and reusable. And that data should be able to be trusted and flowing. And sadly, we have neither data flow, nor standards, nor trust, or a way to share the data for property. So we need to start with fair data principles. So when we've created a data standard for the property packs, digital property packs, we have companies who are using that today, and they're doing offer accepted to exchange of contracts in 15 days with zero fall-throughs, zero fraud, a much better customer experience, more certainty around the moving date, and taking hundreds of hours out of the process because that wasted time's not there. So absolutely, if we had widespread adoption of standards and we digitised the data at source, we would reform this process dramatically.
What we're going to do with those fax machines?
We put them in a museum, I think, Clive.
I don't think you're even allowed to throw them away now.
It's still amazing just to think. You remind me that. How can we live in this age with an important process in people's lives and we're still using fax machines?
We do, and I do worry about that from a security perspective, because when we talk about standards, we don't have data standards or technology standards, but actually the cyber and security controls of our systems. We've got people who are still working on Excel spreadsheets. Somebody can set up an estate agent with nothing more than a website. We absolutely have to raise those standards across our industry and ditch fax machines.
Well, on that point, I think we'll conclude this session. Thank you very much indeed for, I think, posing some challenges to us about how things could be improved for both the buyers and sellers in this process.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Interesting.
Second panel of witnesses, thank you very much for coming. Could you just go down the table at that end and just say who you are and the organisation you're here on behalf of today?
My name's Mairead, Carroll, and I'm here for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors.
My name's Beth, Rudolf. I'm here for the Conveyancing Association, the Digital Property Market Steering Group, and I am co-chair of the Home Buying and Selling Group with Kate.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm Timothy Douglas. I'm the Head of Policy and Campaigns at Propertymark. Propertymark is a professional regulatory body for property agents.
Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Clearly, I'll come on to Beth Rudolf first. Conveyancing is a key part of the whole process of buying and selling. Indeed, it's when the property transfers from one owner to another. So what are the main challenges that you've got at present, and what could you be doing better to meet them?
I think the important point you made there is the at present, and that's the problem. Certainly when I started conveyancing back in the 1990s, you could very easily do a transaction. Well, my fastest transaction was 45 minutes. Now we're looking 22 weeks. And of course we didn't have email then. So what on earth has changed? Well, when you look at the way that we deal with transactions, we have to now recreate the title and the information about the property every time. And the difficulty is that when you send information over to the buyer, or the buyer collects some information, if that information conflicts with the previous information, then you result in an additional inquiry. Now, the reason that this has become a real problem is because of the complexity of titles that occurred after the financial crisis, so leasehold houses, short leases, onerous terms, and the lenders having to adjust their affordability, so things like service charges and stuff like that would impact the ability to proceed. We also now have estate rent charges and managed freehold since the government's announcement that leasehold houses weren't going to be allowed. And so there we've got to deal with all of the management companies, the property agents and any tenants associations, but without any regulation of them. On top of that, the scope creep for conveyancers has increased hugely. When I started doing conveyancing, we had one search. We had all of the information in title deeds packet, which was stored in a fireproof safe, either by the lender or by the solicitors, so that when the property was sold, you'd just take out the deeds packet, and in there you would have the deeds, but you'd also have all of the warranties and guarantees. You'd also have any insurance policies, and you might even have a memo from the previous lawyer explaining the reason they were able to take a view on a particular element and deal with an issue. Since the dematerialisation of deeds by the Land Registry in 2002, all the deeds packets returned to the clients. There was no reason to charge for fireproof safes anymore, and as a result they were lost because they didn't realise how important they were. So unless we get digital property packs, digital property logbooks, we can't recreate that. On top of that, as Kate mentioned, we've got the scope creep of things like Japanese knotweed, we've got environmental issues, and of course we now have to deal with leasehold estate rent charges and managed freeholds. So it's a huge amount of work to do. It used to be that transactions for a sale would probably take 7 working hours of a conveyancer, and a purchase would take probably about 10 working hours. Well, if you think that each week, if you're doing manual progressing of a transaction, that takes half an hour. Well, transactions taking 22 weeks means that you're taking 11 hours just to tell people that you're waiting for something. So it is a huge problem where we've got to now.
Yes, you're almost making us feel sorry for you. All right, things have changed, but has the sector really responded to those changes in the most effective way?
No, and the difficulty is that because there's this misunderstanding of buyer beware applying to all data, conveyancers have not been able to be proactive. So because we think buyer beware means that we can't, as a seller's conveyancer, you don't want to tip them off that there might be a problem. You just don't review any of the documents when they come in at the beginning of a transaction if you're instructed before the property is sold, for example. Now, this doesn't apply anymore, but the difficulty is that every time these things change, the conveyancers have been encouraged to sort of put a disclaimer in saying, well, the seller doesn't know this information, so you can't rely on what they've told you. And you've got these William Sindall case and things like that mean that all of these disclaimers have grown. But, when you think it was only last year that we had the Rossiter case, which again said that the seller should be providing the information that the average consumer would need, that the information, buyer beware, only applies to the intended use and enjoyment of that buyer and that specific information, and doesn't apply to things that would impact the average person. Well, a seller's conveyancer is also a buyer's conveyancer, so they know exactly what would impact the average consumer, and they can look at the lender's handbook to see what would impact the average lender. So we can be proactive, but unfortunately the protocols that we work to currently don't encourage that.
Right. One of the things that often I get complaints about from constituents, I'm sure that colleagues do as well, is that sometimes the view of the conveyancer is so particularly restricted to the title of the plot which the house sits on that other things are missed. And one thing I think was referred to in the previous evidence session was managed freeholds, which are increasingly common, but often information doesn't seem to be given clearly to purchasers that that's the situation they are buying into. Or I just had one the other day talking to a constituent who's clearly got understanding about the property he has bought in terms of the line round that particular land. There's a bit of land which he has to go over to get to the front of his property, which is in, shall we say, ownership which is certainly very complex, results in nobody actually maintaining that. But nobody drew his attention to that when the conveyance was done. I mean, is that the sort of thing that should be picked up, or is it just, sorry, it's not actually the bit you're buying, so tough?
That should be on the advertisement of the property, full stop. I mean, there is a law, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations came out in 2008 saying that anything that would impact the average consumer should be included in the advert. And I think we'd agree that a ransom strip that you're describing should have been explained to the buyer when they were thinking about buying it. Now, I've done quite a lot of education in nudge mentality and psychology, and what you realise is that actually the psychology of a buyer before they decide to buy a property is very different. When they're looking at a property, they will be much more likely to think, oh, is this going to be all right for me? If I know the service charge is going to be huge and there's a ransom strip and I won't be able to drive over it, I'll have to sort that out, I'm probably going to make a different decision to when instead I've put my offer forward and it's been accepted. Hurrah, I've fallen in love with the property. I know that my kids can go to the local school. Everything's brilliant. Well, anything after that comes back as being a problem is just a challenge, something I've got to overcome. And I'll buy it anyway. Or I'm going to have to pull out because the lender says, no, you can't afford this property. And then at which point the transaction falls through.
Right, so you mean that information should be given more up front?
It needs to be given up front so that the buyer can digest it, and also they can understand then what it means to them. In the same way that with a seller, if you get a seller instructing on a property that they're putting on the market, before they find a buyer, if you say fill in these forms, they're absolutely all over it because they know their house is going to sell tomorrow and they just want to get it through and they want to get all of the information up together. But if once you've got a buyer who's put forward an offer and the seller's accepted it, and then you say to the seller, provide us with information that might put your buyer off, might cause a transaction to fall through, well, they're either going to be very much slower in providing this information, which is what we find, or they might just twist some of it and say, I don't know. And then it's up to the buyer to discover that. And that then comes much later in the transaction, so you get people pulling out and the huge costs to all of the industry and to the consumer of waste.
Can I just finally move on to the issue of referral fees? When we did our inquiry as a committee into leasehold properties, and all right, I appreciate these are new build properties, I think we were shocked at the way that comfortable relationships existed, should we put them, between developers and conveyancers. fees were paid over, or you go and the respective purchaser was told you go and lose that firm of solicitors, those conveyancers, and they'll look after you because they know our property and the complications involved, so they get it done quicker. And then the new carpet came out as an incentive to the purchaser, all as part of the package. Not right, that is it?
No. If you're getting so much work from one place that you're not going to risk losing it, that is a huge problem. And, certainly we've seen the issues that arose out of that with the mis-selling of leasehold properties. There are some of our members, though, at the Conveyancing Association who would point out that actually if you've got referral fees, that means that you have SLAs, service level agreements, with referral panel managers. And because of that, that means that you're going to provide a better service because you signed up the service level agreement. But also, more importantly, you know how much work you're going to get in, which then means that you feel able to invest in technology and all of the sort of things that can improve the process for the consumer.
So should we have a review then of referral fees and how they should or shouldn't operate?
I think the important thing to know about referral fees is that you can tell a buyer that they're paying a referral fee, but unless they understand what it means to them, it won't make a difference. So I think trying to find a better way to deal with referral fees. I mean, certainly others of our members would say, well, you should cap referral fees. I don't think anybody would say ban referral fees, because then it would go back to what it was before they were allowed, which was manila envelopes being passed under the table and holidays being paid for and all sorts of bad behaviour.
We need to regulate them.
Regulation is key.
Let's move on then to the issue of conveyancing factories. Andrew.
Thank you very much. So Beth, to you again. Are so-called conveyancing factories a problem with industry? And if they are a problem, why is that?
Well, it depends what you describe as a problem. So when you look at the complaints ratios at the Legal Ombudsman, they sit, I think, round about 0.1% of people who use conveyancers complain to the Legal Ombudsman. And that doesn't change with the volume conveyancing companies doing it. The difficulty is that, of course, they're dealing with 30,000 transactions. So it might be for a conveyancer who's only dealing with 100 transactions that it seems they're always coming across them and that they hear all these complaints about them. But the benefit of those larger conveyancing companies is that they're specialist conveyancers and they will invest in the technology and enable the consumer to have the service that they desire. Yeah. However, of course, high street conveyancers can also do that and do also do that. So
do you think it's just a pejorative term in the same way as something like Direct Line, a small high street insurance company would call an insurance factory or something? Or is there something more to it than that? No,
I think it's definitely a pejorative term. Yeah. What we're talking about is volume conveyancers using technology and teams to enable the transaction to be dealt with efficiently.
Do you think the Legal Ombudsman's report in 2012 has been taken seriously by the sector?
Yes, and if you look at the reports now in 2022, 2023, the number of complaints about conveyancing is half that of the complaints about lawyers doing wills and probate or divorces. So, but yet the 23% of the complaints are about delay. So it kind of doesn't matter what you do to try and provide a good service. If your property is in a chain of transactions, then you can only go as fast as the slowest person in the chain. So unless we mandate the improvements that the last panel were talking about, that's not going to make any difference to the number of complaints received.
Quite often the default in this committee is a solution that whatever we're dealing with needs more regulation. And we've got to the sort of situation we've got as a society of being breathtakingly over-regulated, which is why things take 22 weeks instead of 45 minutes. So how would you suggest that conveyancing moves forward in a way that may involve regulation but it is better regulation, not just more regulation.
Yeah, so when you think about the current regulation of estate agents, so these are the people that have to know, well, certainly if they're letting a property, they've got to know 70 different bits of legislation. And certainly with one selling property, they need to know about the consumer protection for unfair trading regulations. The difficulty is that because they're unregulated, they're also uneducated, so they don't know about these things. So you can produce as many laws as you like, but it won't make a difference. For example, my son currently is renting a property. He said to the landlord, where's the HMO licence? Within a week, he'd received a Section 21 no-fault eviction notice. So he said, well, you know, I think you also need to note that your EPC is out of date by 2 years, and it's an F-rated EPC, so you're not allowed to let the property. You didn't pay my deposit into a tenancy deposit scheme until late, so you're supposed to give that back to me. By the way, I don't think you've got planning permission for the bit behind. So all of those things are there, and the fines in total will have come to £12,000 if he was able to take it to court and wanted to take it to court. But without the regulation of that property agent when they let it out, how were they supposed to know? And it's lucky that his mum knows a little bit about the law, although he did look up a lot of it himself as well. And as a result, he's able to say that. But unless we're going to educate consumers, and when I say consumers, I mean estate agents, all stakeholders, as well as the people who are buying and selling, renting and letting properties out, we're not going to improve the process.
Yeah, I often think we don't get enough anecdotes in this committee, and that was a particularly good one. So thank you very much.
Right, moving on now to the regulation of property agents. Ian.
Thanks, Beth. I've got to know, did the landlord withdraw the Section 21?
Well, we don't know yet if he's going to. However, on the email that my son's going to send, we'll include a link to this parliamentary TV element, and we'll see if that helps.
You'll have to keep us informed. Just touching on estate agents, go to you first, Tim. Are estate agents adequately regulated at the moment?
Well, I think if we're talking about qualification and licensing property agents, then I think we'd say no. There's very limited barriers to operate in the sector, and there's not even a minimum requirement to belong to a professional body where they're going to be interacting with latest information, government updates and legislation. I think what we do have is obviously the Estate Agency Act 1979. Now, that hasn't been reviewed or amended really in detail for over 40 years, and that the premise of that legislation is it's providing a definition of estate agency work, but essentially that legislation is enforced by the National Trading Standards Estate and Letting Agency team, but essentially they're enforcing against almost on a sort of negative procedure, if that makes sense. So they're enforcing against what already should be happening, rather than regulating and licensing agents from the outset to.
How many rogue estate agents have actually been taken with that law in the last period?
Yeah, it's not a figure I have to hand on the National Estate Agents have a banning list, and that data would be on there. As an aside, what we also need to do through wider regulation is ensure that banning list is joined up with the database of rogue landlords and property agents as well. At the moment, those two lists, should be combined and aren't.
Okay, so not adequately regulated. Beth, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Without the regulation of property agents, we're not going to solve this. And that's very much something that we saw with the misinformation and the mis-selling of leasehold property. And the amount of emails that I get from the Conveyancing Association members, absolutely gobsmacked by property agents, particularly on leasehold properties, requiring unreasonable fees to obtain a deed of covenant, which is on a lease dated after 1995, and so isn't even required because the Landlord and Tenant Covenants Act says these are enforceable covenants for everybody. You do not need a deed of covenant, and yet people are being charged £1,000. So without the regulation of property agents, we're not going to be able to do this. And the wonderful thing about the regulation of property agents is that it will deal with agents selling property, agents managing properties, agents letting properties. This is everybody's home we're talking about in the country.
Very good points. Ms. Carroll?
Yeah, so RICS, we regulate our members, and so they are held to a set of standards, rules of conduct of their behaviour. They have to undergo training and qualifications in order to be a member of RICS. So we are really firmly in the belief that agents should be regulated and that professional bodies should be able to do that regulation in terms of oversight of their members that they've been doing for many, many, many years. We've been around for over 150 years. We worked with the Property Ombudsman to develop an overarching code for property agents based on the work that Lord Beth did.
I'll touch on that in a minute.
Oh, sorry, shall I stop then? And that's currently with the department.
Okay. I'll stay with you. The Homeowners Alliance has said that the current system redresses confusion for consumers. What more needs to be done to support the consumer?
I think if we look at things like the overarching code, I think that would be a really good start. That would provide a great deal of clarity to consumers about what they can expect from their estate agent and their property agent. We would really like to see surveys done at an earlier stage. I think we see that kind of like sometimes around about 1 in 4 people get a survey. The Homeowners Alliance have done some great research on surveys recently, and it showed that a third of people who got a survey were able to renegotiate on price or to get work changed because they realised that things needed to be done and to be improved. I think at the moment so many people leave their survey to the very, very last minute, and I completely understand why they do that. Because it's a big cost, and if things go pear-shaped, it's a big cost to bear, and so people don't. So we need to think about finding a way in which to encourage and to find a system that encourages people to get that survey at an earlier stage so that they fully understand the condition of the property.
Can I just pick up on that and what was said in the earlier session? So, as you know, in Scotland, the Home Report includes the single survey. And this is the point, is that the seller then pays for it. And, you know, there was some comment from Kate that, well, the culture's different in Scotland. Well, it wasn't when they brought it in, but it didn't stop the properties going on the market. That you have the same number of properties as a percentage and comparable to England going on the market before, during and after the implementation of home reports. We did a survey of home movers and homeowners to ask them what they thought, and we got 1,000 responses. 80% of them said yes, the seller should be providing this information up front. And the majority of them had already bought a property within the last 10 years. And so they were the sellers. Yeah. The feeling was very much that it was down to the seller, because the seller knows they're going to sell the property. The buyer doesn't know whether or not they can buy the property. And for the majority of people, it is neutral cost, because you're now buying it on your sale instead of on a purchase you don't even know if you're going to buy.
Really good point, Tim.
I was just going to come back. I think we shouldn't necessarily just brush over the regulation of property agents. I think it has got a massively important part to play in terms of improving the home buying selling process, in terms of level of the playing field, improving the education and knowledge of the agent, and a greater level of consumer protection. However, you know, there's a wider context of, you know, Transparency International say that there's £6.7 billion since 2016 of sort of unsolicited or dirty money that's been invested in property, you know, in the UK. And why is that? Because, well, essentially anyone can set up a property agency. You know, we know from our members that if they hold client money, then they need to have client money protection. They need to put that in pooled or undesignated client accounts. What we're actually seeing is the banks, the banking community, not allowing these client accounts to be opened, or they're actually closing undesignated accounts with agents who have been with them, some of the big banks, for 30, 40 years. And ultimately, the agents are the only part of the home buying selling process that isn't regulated. And I think that's where we don't get, or we could get greater trust, coordination, going forward.
But staying with you, in 2018, Lord Best chaired the Regulation of Property Agents Working Group, and he made a number of key recommendations, including creating a new independent regulatory body with powers to enforce a code of conduct. 2018, 2024 now, should it have been implemented?
Yes, I mean, certainly, and I think if you look at the legislation that's come in since then, the Building Safety Act, the changes we're going to see through the leasehold, changes we see through renters reform, I think it's just absolutely madness that we're not qualifying or licensing the competency of the individuals who are going to carry out this rather complicated legal and legislative work. So we need to see it. I think understandable, we have had the pandemic in that process. We've probably had too many housing ministers and Secretary of States in that process, but we need the political will from the UK government to do it. Time is an excuse. There is existing legislation going through the houses on the leasehold side and the Renters Reform Bill, which can be put in as triggers. We're not looking for it overnight, but I think those triggers should be in. The industry wants it, and the consumers need it.
Well, that's a
really
good message. Go ahead, Beth.
The problem that you've got also is that we're expecting the public purse to regulate estate agents through national trading standards. Well, of course, national trading standards are funded by local authority, which have no money, and therefore they, as rightly so, will be looking at things that impact health and safety. If we have a regulator, as we do with the legal industry and the financial industry, that is paid for by the people regulated, then that will ensure that we're taking it out of the public purse and putting it into the industry where it should be.
And I guess on that, national trading standards technically aren't a regulator, they're an enforcement agency, and they can only enforce on the legislation that currently exists. If you introduce some form of regulation in the way that we regulate our members, you're not just looking at the legislation, you're looking at behaviour, you're looking at conduct, you're looking at standards across the board. So you're actually changing the way that you actually deal with agents, and those agents who are not treating people in the way that they ought to.
Good point. It's a very good message for the current government and any future governments as well. Do you want to go change there, Tim?
Well, I just think that the wider issue is, I think if you look at redress as well, and we've touched on code of practices, I think it's that wider coordination of what's happening. And I think, as Mairead just alluded to, as I said at the start, national trading standards are essentially enforcing a sort of negative licensing regime against the legislation, and we need a more proactive approach that sort of licenses and qualifies. As Mairead has said, we have looked at, as an industry, an overarching code of practice, but there's other things within the sector that needs greater coordination. We have redress schemes. All property agents need to belong to a government-approved redress scheme. However, these redress schemes aren't all operating or adjudicating in the same way. One works to a code of practice and one doesn't, and therefore that doesn't form. There's a lack of coordination there. Through the Renters Reform Bill, we're bringing in landlord redress, so another private renter sector ombudsman. Now, if that ombudsman scheme, or the three ombudsman schemes, aren't working together in tandem, there aren't adequate timescales for agents to deal with complaints, and these aren't set out for landlords, the communication processes, it's going to be a complete mess. So there's already, things that they need to look at in order to coordinate that, which is a stepping stone to regulation.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Right, moving on now to the issue of information. Andrew.
Thank you. So just ask you all in turn, start with you, Mairead, what you all think is currently causing the provision of material information in transactions we've been discussing to take so long.
I think there's a number of different challenges. So material information is some very, very specific guidance that has come through from trading standards based on the Consumer Protection Regulations 2008. The information that within the material information guidance isn't all the information that you need to buy a property, and actually not all the information that is within that is material. So in the guidance it will talk about something like deeds and rights and construction of the property. But actually one of the things that could be equally material for you as a consumer is it's on the flight path from Heathrow, or you're just above a tube station and you're dealing with the rumble every morning. So there are things that the challenge is that there's so much information that could be material to a consumer, depending on that consumer at that point of time. There's also so much other information that's coming through that people do need to know about in addition to the material information. So I think the challenge is that, and it sits in so many different ways, which I think was alluded to earlier, that there are a number of different players who have all this information and who are tackled with it. I think some of the challenges for us in terms of material information as it is that we are not instructing, there is no mandating of, or no legal mandation of an upfront survey or of an upfront conveyancing. So we're entirely dependent on the seller going out and doing that, and then the buyer has to do pretty much the same themselves if they choose to go down having a survey. So it's one of those challenges is that trying to bring everybody together to work through where that information sits, and I think there's a lot about the digitisation of information. I think it's really difficult, and I think at the moment there are so many aspects to this that actually it becomes quite complicated, and so it's about how those people interact with each other.
Any particular one of those bodies you think holding things up or having some sort of process requirement that is particularly onerous or time consuming relative to the others?
I think that there is always the challenge to make sure you get the legals right. That's always going to be really important. Trying to get all that information can be quite difficult. It can take a long time to get local authority searches. There are so many things that within this that are taking time that aren't necessarily within the gift of an individual. It's within the gift of so many different people. And I think this is where the role of government has a place.
Do you think in the sort of risk culture that we live in, the incentive is always to just sort of double check and make sure that no one can come back at you and trip you up at the expense of things taking forever, because it's safer to cause everyone annoyance by taking 22 weeks than it is to get something potentially wrong?
I can say working with surveyors, private indemnity insurance has been incredibly tough to get, especially looking at highly complicated and complex buildings. And I think there is definitely a challenge for people who go down that route of either whether they're doing the conveyancing or the surveying on those buildings, because you are taking on an additional risk that you haven't had to face before. And insurers have become slightly nervous about actually the level of risk that is available, and also premiums have increased. So I think there is always going to be that challenge that we are dealing with, and we are in a situation where things have become much more complicated and much more complex, especially with some of the properties that are being bought and sold now.
An incentive for surveyors to be vague, like this is a roof, there might be something wrong with it, but I can't really say.
I would say that it's, well, potentially it could be an incentive. However, the way we structure the home survey, the report and the home survey standard, and we're reviewing that this year to pick up on the feedback that we've had, is actually the challenge is that yes, there is that risk, but I think the surveyors have rules of conduct. We have standards that they are expected to adhere to. They also have to make sure that they're meeting their insurance liabilities.
No, thank you. Same sort of questions to you, Beth.
Well, certainly from the conveyancer's perspective, we have this belief in the unknown of liability, and if you're providing upfront information, your liability increases, which of course is rubbish. The liability stays exactly the same. You have to advise your client, and you have to do it in the best interest of your client. What happens is that risk reduces, and we did when we looked at creating the buying and selling property information data set. We did go and have a chat with the insurers, and they said, yeah, this would absolutely reduce the risk, because the information is being provided upfront to the buyer. They get to see it, they get to make a decision that is right for them. If they then complain about it later, you can evidence that they have had that information and everybody knows the base on which the deal has been made. The difficulty that we have is that because estate agents are the only ones with the legal obligation of providing the information up front in terms of material information, we're not getting conveyancers dealing with it when they should. And I'm also hearing that when estate agents do say to sellers, go and instruct your conveyancer, get them to complete the forms, the solicitors are saying, well, no, that's early doors, we won't do that until you've got a buyer. So completely mucking it up. Now, the reason for that is because there is one protocol which is created by the Law Society, and the unintended consequences of that is that it doesn't recognise actually that things have changed. And certainly if you look at the Law Society's Conveyancing Handbook, it references the CPRs back in 2008 and says, let's wait and see. The reality is that what we need, and this is what we're doing in the Digital Property Market Steering Group, is to create a protocol that goes across the entire industry. As you've heard, the industry needs to collaborate. You're using the same information. The title document currently is obtained by the estate agent, by the conveyancer, by the mortgage broker, by the lender. That's the same document 4 times. Digital ID, well, you can double that if it was digital, but at the moment people are expecting to trot in with a passport or a driving licence, whereas if it was digital, it'd be so much easier because you can just share the certificate confirming that your ID has been verified across everybody. So what we need is to create a protocol that tells the industry who's going to get what, when, and how it's going to be shared. Now, we did go out to industry and we had 350 respondents in the Digital Property Market Steering Group saying, yes, we want this. So 80% said it would be very helpful to have it. And then that means that we're not reliant upon one entity to update the protocol when things change. And let's face it, it needs to be iterative. We've got the DSIT bill going through on digital ID and digital assets. And we've got other things like digital signatures going through, qualified electronic signatures. So we need to keep flexing and improving, whilst at the same time looking after those people that aren't able to deal digitally and enabling them either to deal digitally or to ensure that the analogue process is just as speedy as the digital one.
We'll get to the stage where someone can do that for them, given that that's going to be where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When you think that 80% of people have a smartphone, and even when you look at people over 65, well, in fact, it's 98% of people under 30 that have a smartphone. Over 65 is 80%. But those other 20%, well, if they haven't got a smartphone, they may not own a property. But if they do own a property, they certainly know people with smart devices, and the estate agent could help them. Their sons and daughters could help them.
I think same set of questions to you.
Thank you, Andrew. I think I definitely agree with what Beth's saying. Greater collaboration, reducing duplication is key to all of this. I mean, from Propertymark's perspective and our members, we know that upfront information is essential for home buyers and sellers to make informed decisions. We've asked members recently, 73% said providing that information up front results in an increase in speed, and 63% say producing information up front results in a reduction in the number of failed sales. So we know that there's a positive reason for doing it. I think what we need to understand is that the recent changes through the National Trade and Standards Estate and Letting Agency team, parts A, B and C, they're not new regulations, they're a new framework of working. And I think that's partly because, as Beth has alluded to, the consumer protection regulations have been in place since 2008. New guidance was issued to the sector in 2020, which was, I think, trying to move towards presenting information that agents can use that consumers will help, helping them to help consumers for it to understand. I think what we would like to see is it to go a bit further and have more examples, more practical examples in there of what agents should and should not do. I mean, page 23, I was just looking at that guidance. The CPRs define material information as the information that the average consumer needs according to the context to take an informed transactional decision. Now, within that, what does average consumer need? What does, in the context, and take an informed transactional decision? We're asking, a lot, and there's a very much ambiguity in terms of those CPRs, average consumer, So I think the move towards the parts A, B and C is positive. It's a new framework for presenting that information. How then it's collected and the liability of it is a different matter, but it is moving things in the right direction.
Thanks, Andrew. Right, so there's a frustrated consumer, a lot of them out there thinking, what's going to happen? And they're thinking, well, what are that lot down in Westminster going to do to improve this situation? So we're going to make recommendations to government, one each. What's the most important thing we should be recommending then for the change that should happen?
We're only going to get one.
You don't have to agree with each other. There you go.
One each.
I think, should I go first?
You go first, you go first, and then what you don't cover,
I think ultimately for Propertymark, it is regulation of property agents, and I think as an aside to that is an overarching strategy for housing and the property sector. I think too much is done in isolation between the private rented sector, building safety now, and home buying and selling, and we need an overarching strategy that brings that all together.
That's cheating, that's two, but anyway, we'll let you go.
Oh dear, if you're going to think that's cheating. So all of that, but also, we've got the leasehold and freehold reform bill in at the moment. We've got the opportunity, please, to throw in a lot more. When you think that property agents are not actually regulated or required to provide upfront information. They're not required to provide the leasehold property inquiries. In fact, a landlord can say, I'm not going to give you this information. So then we've got a problem with building safety and everything else. So I think we need to simplify the titles. We've got the perfect storm coming with the estate rent charges and the managed freeholds and the leaseholds, where all of the councils no longer have the money to adopt roadways or public open spaces. So we're having to have these complex titles, but that because the community have no control over that, they can't actually enforce it and get the work done. And we're hearing of roads not good enough for refuse lorries to drive down. So it is the perfect storm coming. So we need the regulation of property agents to ensure that people can get this work done and get the service charges at a sensible rate and not being ripped off. But then on top of that, for the actual buying of those properties, we need to have that upfront information. So I'm sorry, I've given you at least 3.
Right.
So regulation of property agents, of course, I think that's universal. I think also the adoption, some form of Secretary of State adoption of the overarching code, was a lot of work has gone into that. I think it would be a really good framework to start actually providing clear guidance to the consumers about what they should expect from their property agents. And then I guess we would always say we would like to talk to government about more surveys and supporting consumers with understanding the condition of the property that they're going to buy, so that they're not in a position where they end up finding there are some hidden nasties that they weren't expecting.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for giving that information and suggestions to us, as well as all the other responses you've given to our questions. That's been very helpful to us in coming to our views eventually about recommendations we'll make to the government.
Marvellous. Thank you for your time.
Order. That brings us to the end of our public proceedings for today.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.